different sides of the country today. Dr. Elouise is East Coast. I am back in the Bay Area for a couple weeks before I head to Washington, D.C. So, Dr. Elouise, what are we going to chat about today?
We're going to talk about data centers again, and a topic that I love. And by the way, speaking of East Coast, you can see, for those of you watching the YouTube feed, you can see the New York skyline behind me. It's beautiful, and just as a teaser,
it looks really sunny if that's real and not fake. It's 8:30 at night your time, and it's like looks perfect.
Yeah, no, it's very humid and warm out. It's a beautiful night. If I didn't have to get up early tomorrow, I would go walking around the city, which I might do tomorrow night. But yeah, it was raining this morning, but it turned out to be a quite nice afternoon, and it's light here till almost 9 o'clock. So a great summer or late spring. Oh no, I guess we're in summer now, but beautiful night here.
Love that. So data centers, we talked about it before. We're talking about it again. It's becoming a theme for the show.
It is, because data centers, as we talked, are some of the most important assets out there right now. And you happen to go to Data Center Expo on June 4th and 5th at the Santa Clara Convention Center. And I have so many questions, because what a great event. And maybe could you summarize what it was like, what got covered, and then I really want to know the state of data centers and the state of data centers vis-a-vis the big three: Google, Amazon, and Microsoft. So I don't know. That to me is the first place to start.
Yeah, and Amazon just announced they're building 2 new data centers in Pennsylvania.
Wow.
So we'll have to. I know Meta announced a couple months ago a major data center project, and I was just reading an article actually this morning about the Amazon investment. They didn't list the actual dollar amount, but I assume 2 data centers will be in the billions of dollars and a long-term investment.
So do you know if they're being powered by the nuclear power plant, or
one of them in particular is it's right next to, and they specifically called out the location was picked because they're going to be powered directly from the nuclear power plant.
Wow, that's amazing.
So 3 kind of themes. So I'll give an overall. So this is my first data center event. My company was a sponsor, and we actually did a session talking about the difference and the benefits of an asset-centric approach versus a room-centric approach to managing a data center. Room-centric approach is very kind of old school legacy. You focus on the layout and design versus tracking and making the assets the core of the data center. So a different model. So we talked about some of the benefits and differences between the two. I will say, so it was a 2-day event, definitely heavier traffic and much better attendance on the first day. So June 4th, It seems like it was located in the Bay Area. It was in Santa Clara at the convention center. Seems like folks picked one day or the other. I don't get the sense that a lot of people attended both days. So I'm assuming a lot of the content was heavily loaded on the first day. So that's why folks chose to kind of attend that versus the second day. And then 2 rooms. There was actually a data center room, which is where our booth was housed because we wanted very specific data center traffic. And then there was a much larger room that had much broader categories like AI and the Internet of Things and infrastructure. So more general for the larger room, much more data center specific content. Probably my favorite session that I attended was hosted actually by Brinda Ganesh. And she is at Microsoft, and she is the principal at the Azure Hardware Strategy Planning. So she kind of runs that division and that product line. And then they had 4 really interesting panelists. One is the CEO of a company called Mod 42, who builds data centers and then transplants them directly to the facility. So think about the change in construction that's happening in the housing market, where we can buy 3D houses that are prefabricated and built, and then you can just drop them and deliver them on a plot of land. Same idea for a data center. So
Whoa, that
instead of,
is trippy. Like trippy, I don't know if that's a good word, but wow, like I never even thought about that. That's
yeah, so
mind blowing.
he's taken that model from the housing and applied it to the data center space, where you can build a module data center and the components and then have it delivered at the location. So big advantage there is speed to market. Data centers can take years and years to build. Hit one of his value props is we can do it, in significantly less time.
So in that, does he build the infrastructure but not the servers? Or like where
That's
does he,
correct.
yeah, okay, yeah.
Yep. He's
So
focused on the
HVAC,
infrastructure.
power
Yep.
input, and okay, yeah.
Yep.
Wow, that's we might have to do a whole separate topic on that guy.
So he was panelist 1, and again, he's the CEO of a company called Mod 42, which is MOD 42, all one word. Then they had Harry Wang, who is the director of data center at Meta. So tons of knowledge and experience in the data center space. Then Zachary Matthews, who is the VP of Hyperscale Cloud at Iron Mountain. So a VP of Hyperscale and Cloud at Iron Mountain. And then Cosimo, and I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce his last name, but he is the partnership director at BP of IT hardware and OEM, which stands for original equipment manufacturer. So she moderated this discussion, and again, probably my favorite session that I attended, because I thought they had really, really interesting content and kind of a unique perspective. 3 themes that were my takeaways from their session and several other sessions as well. Power is the most important driver of all things data center right now. Nothing matters more than power. There's a huge power shortage and an issue with people being able to get power. So things are completely driven by the availability to get power more than anything else. Second takeaway, cost has gone out the window. So when you think about all of our procurement and supply chain friends and the metrics that, the traditional model is your bonus and your performance is driven on cost savings or cost optimization, not happening right now in data center. People are scrambling to get anything and everything they can. So if you are on the marketing side or on a go-to-market team, I would not prioritize cost as a number 1, 2, or 3 value driver at the moment. And then third takeaway.
Well, let me just interject on that one. That kind of gets to, sometimes we've talked about high growth procurement versus legacy procurement, because we have a small number, but a number of practitioners in our world that are in our networks that all work for high growth companies, and procurement in that realm is speed to market and the ability to enable the business versus holding the business back. And oftentimes there's friction there when you take a legacy person or process or approach and put it into a high growth company. That's where things like is metal on metal, and that doesn't work.
And to piggyback on that, a couple of the panelists, again, throughout different sessions, talked about the immaturity of supply chain in the data center space. Yeah. And these companies are moving so fast that they don't really have formal supply chain processes and systems. And it's going to become more important in a focus area. So for folks who are kind of listening and figuring out career paths and what to specialize in, I would definitely look into data center. You get an expertise and a niche in that space, and I think you'll become much more employable and marketable.
Absolutely. And the other thing about that, much like in oil and gas, there's a lot of parallels between the two, is you have a constrained supply market. It's first of all, there's not that many energy providers. There's not that many HVAC providers that can do the scale and so forth. And anyway, on and on, like security providers and so forth. At construction, granted, there's a lot more construction companies, but having a particular specialty in data center construction can be its own thing. So it is really a fascinating procurement space to be in.
And then my third kind of theme takeaway from the event. This one's really interesting, and it wasn't something that I even considered. Sustainability, meaning sustainable products and services that are created or offered for the data center space, are growing rapidly, but not because they're sustainable.
Okay.
So what's happening is nobody can get what they need for the data center. So the companies that offer sustainable products, numbers that were thrown out are 30 to 40% more expensive than non-sustainable products. But because the non-sustainable products are on such back order and the speed to market is so slow, the companies are buying the sustainable products and paying 30 to 40% more because they can get them faster. So they're not buying them because they're sustainable. They're buying them because of the turnaround time.
So this was going to get to one of my next questions, because like one of the biggest knocks on AI, as it is for blockchain, by the way, if that even still exists, is the compute power is creating and the energy draw is creating an environmental disaster, or it is an environmental disaster in the making, however you want to phrase that. So I was going to ask if sustainability was a topic, and I'm, now that you say that, I'm surprised that, like, what was that even a theme of, like, sort of greening the data center, if you will?
There were definitely audience questions throughout the day around, does sustainability matter? Do you care as you're looking at a data center project? Where does it fall? And almost every single speaker and panelist said, sustainability sounds really good, but we don't care about that right now, in that we care about power and many other things more. But we are buying sustainable products because we can get them so much faster. So it was like this weird twist on the growth in sustainability, but that not really being the driver.
So I think that not for today, but like that needs more interrogation, because at some point that, and look, I'm a big critic of corporate ESG, but it does seem like the biggest culprit amongst other sort of plastics and pollution and so forth. But boy, data centers have to be right up there in terms of needing ESG attention. Like I can believe it, but I'm shocked that
Mhm.
it's like that's not a topic in data center world.
No. So I would say those are kind of my three themes that I took away, and then I'll do a deep dive. I've kind of put a list together of some of the buckets of key takeaways. So obvious, but I'm going to start with it. AI is breaking the mold. All of the growth and driver in this category is because of AI. Hands down, biggest push in this space ever, and it is the key driver. AI is testing all the limits, and by that it means speed, scale, and power. And it's forcing smarter builds, not just faster ones. And a quote that I took away from the event was, efficiency has to be baked in from day one. So AI is everything right now in the data center space. So second thing is
Well, actually,
power.
before we go on, does that also mean in terms of operations, or just supporting the open AIs and Anthropics and Geminis of the world?
Yeah,
Like the
so the
products,
answer,
or actually operating the data centers?
Operating the data centers. So
Hmm.
it's the driver of why there is the growth in the data center space, and then it's a driver for increased efficiency in operating the data center. Because we've got some major players right now competing in the data centers in the AI space, and the being able to deliver to the end customer matters a lot, right? We're in a world where there's four major players in AI, and if there's a support operational power issue for one of them, that will significantly impact their ability to take over and dominate the market.
Right. All right, number two.
Number two is power is the new gold standard. And Brenda, who again is from Microsoft, who moderated the panel, said, power dictates site selection more than anything else. So when you look at why things are being built where they are, the absolute driver is power and will continue to be for quite some time. Everyone was talking about they're not sure how the power shortage issue is going to be fixed or solved, and they don't expect that to change anytime through the end of 2025.
So, so obviously that's why they're spinning up 3 Mile Island and placing data centers in Pennsylvania. So is it fair to say, if I preface this by saying I'm going to make a joke about Texas, that not many data centers are going to be built in Texas?
I think I did not actually hear of one data center build project in Texas at the event.
Yeah, and for those that aren't aware, so there's two main grids in the U.S., the Western grid and the Eastern grid, and then Texas has its own special grid because they're well, for whatever reason, and they've had some serious outages over the last few years. So, and because they're not tied into the broader American grids, when they go down, they go down hard.
And I luckily missed the power grid outage disaster before I moved to Austin. So there were people that I heard that were out of power for like 10 days
Yeah.
when the grid went down. So I did not have to live through that. But there was some scares over the last
Yeah.
couple of
Oh,
years
yeah.
about it going out again. So definitely a hot topic. All right, number three.
Yeah.
This is from Chris Ambrio, who again is the CEO and founder of Mod 42, which really interesting. He's an engineer by trade, so kind of very technical, kind of more nerdy, introverted guy, but some really interesting info. So he says modular is the new massive. And one of his quotes was build small to build large. And he believes that module designs scale better and you can shrink your footprint by engineering smarter from the start. So one of his value props, other than speed to market, being able to build a new data center or revamp a data center much faster because he's building things offsite and then delivering them built on site, is that when you do it the right way, you can build a smaller data center that takes up less space and it needs less power and things to run and support it, which will actually save you quite a bit of money in the long term. And then one of the things that he said that he thinks can be the biggest impact in the data center space is having data centers run hotter. So even a half percentage or a percentage decrease in the heat and the temperature that's required to run a data center can have a really, really big impact. Now, he says that, and then NVIDIA is actually trying to make their data centers cooler, which is actually going the opposite way and is going to have a negative impact. But he said from a sustainability efficiency perspective, that's probably the number one thing data centers can do is being able to run hotter, meaning reduce the cooling energy And then another thing he talked about is having power that does not require water. So if there's a way to have air power versus water, can also have a really big impact. Now, nobody's figured this out yet on a large scale, but it's something that was brought up to your point earlier around sustainability.
Yeah, that's really interesting, especially the running hotter. Like, what is that point where you can clock the machines or let them run and but not have to cool as much? Or what would be interesting is to find alternative cooling methods. Again, I'm not an engineer, but like there's got to be some technology or some breakthrough to do some sort of naturally cooling or displacement, I would think.
Mhm. All right, next takeaway was AI plus hyperscale equals demand shock. These are my Sarah Scudder titles too, so I kind of tried to theme all my notes together. So Harry Wang, who works at Meta, a couple key takeaways from him around one of the things that was asked is what are the major challenges or concerns that folks are experiencing? And for him, he thinks energy supply is a huge, huge risk and concern. And around the AI, the Deepfake issue, where
Hmm.
you have people impersonating and running major scams. He thinks as we see more and more AI, that's going to be a bigger challenge and concern, which then brings in the regulation piece. He feels there's a huge lack around regulation and that nobody's really figured that out and determining how much government is going to get involved, like what's appropriate, who's going to manage it. So there's a whole world around what does regulation look like today and what should it look like in the next year or so. And then he was the one who talked about buyers paying 30-40% more for sustainable equipment, and that sustainability manufacturers, again, who are producing equipment specifically for data centers, are seeing a major boost in sales, but it's not because their products are sustainable. It's because they're able to get the products faster. And then Zach Matthews, who is the VP at Iron Mountain, one of the key things he talked about is that retrofitting is too slow and that AI needs purpose-built factories from scratch. So it was interesting. There were several questions from attendees around why are data centers being built where they are and why are not more data centers being retrofitted? Meaning we already have data centers. Why are we not just refurbishing or enhancing? And according to the panelists, organizations feel it's better and faster actually to build new data centers versus retrofit the existing ones. And I don't know enough about the minute details there to kind of comment on that, but a lot of talk around the newness versus upgrading existing facilities.
That's interesting.
And then Cosmio, Cosimo, who works at BP, feels that water cooling is becoming a huge political topic and is a big driver of a lot of the costs and location selections, and that we're going to have more and more political issues get involved around the amounts of water that are needed to supply and support data centers because of all the water needed to power the cooling. And then he talked about, I mentioned this a couple minutes ago, about NVIDIA's push for lower chip temps and reshaping infrastructure, which is going to cause a whole slew of issues needing to run even cooler than they are. And then a big takeaway from him was around the importance of building partnerships with your suppliers in the data center space, because there is so much happening and so much change that you need to really have an inside track and a connection and someone to provide best practices and support and guides. So you really need to look at, as you're building and building out data centers, that your suppliers are your partners and that you have the right people in place to help support that.
Yeah, well, on both of those last two presenters, I mean, I think there's no doubt that governments are going to intercede, and much like supply chains or national security matters, increasingly data centers are becoming national security priorities, and as such, they're going to be subject to regulation. And do you then start do data centers do what supply chains did 30 years ago and move offshore to lower cost countries or lower regulated countries? It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. It was just also so interesting. Like, data center is so new that it's even hard to say somebody's a data center expert, because data centers are new for most people. And so as these VPs and CEOs are talking about it, they're like, things are changing so fast and evolving so much, it's hard to stay current. And they even work in the data center space. So
Yeah.
it's just like kind of the wild, wild west right now as to what that's going to look like.
But it has been for 25 years. I mean, think about the .com, same thing. People were rushing and like doing all this chaos to bring capacity online, and it's for sure scaled at something unimaginable right now. But I think the one thing that's been consistent is massive change over the last 25 years, almost every sort of generational cycle.
Mhm. And then, so kind of to close out the learnings, is what comes next. Like, we are where we are. What is gonna be? What's the roadmap like for the next 6 or 12 months? So, generic cloud builds won't cut it. AI workloads require high density, purpose built designs. So that's a big change. Cooling is now a mission critical engineering frontier. And then, what does the new roadmap look like for data centers? AI native architectures, tight hardware and software co design, modernization of the hardware lifecycle. And for me, since I'm in the IT asset management space, I would argue that we're going to see a pivot from the floor based model and strategy to more of an asset model and strategy, where data centers are considering putting the asset at the center of the model and really focusing on tracking all the data center assets, so they're audit ready, they're compliance ready, and they have the data and information they need to be able to make faster, better decisions, which means you're going to track from the second something is procured all the way through the end of life when something is actually being decommissioned, versus just assets kind of being an afterthought and set in the data center and only tracked when they're on the network or on the wire. But when you're making major investments, your procurement and finance team is going to want to track status and where things are from the second of purchase. And then again, when things come off the wire and off the network, until they're fully decommissioned and end of life. So I think we're going to see a little bit of a strategy shift in how people are executing and thinking about setting up and tracking and monitoring data center procurement.
So I've got three sort of responses / questions. I mean, that does get to a question about e-waste, because as you described that sort of refurbishing, but also or upgrading existing facilities, but this tighter mesh between hardware, fit for purpose hardware and software working in tandem and developed, designed, and engineered in tandem, that definitely feels like that's going to create a bunch of it might very quickly disrupt existing infrastructure and various other components, or this hardware could get out of date quickly. And I wonder, if we're not careful, we could be generating e-waste at scale from the data centers alone.
Well, in the non-data center space, there's a whole industry and market about after things have technically run their course. Let's say you're an organization and you have a typical kind of standard is 3 to 5 years where you're going to have hardware components for your employees. Well, something may still be very functional and in working condition after 5 years. So instead of just cleaning it and then throwing it away, there's a whole market for organizations to take over products that you're and endpoints and hardware that you're no longer using, and then refurbishing it and reselling it. So I see that a market like that could definitely exist and get much larger in the data center space. So let's say you've got servers or racks or cords or different equipment, and after 3 years your company policy is to get something new. Somebody else, you might be able to clean that completely, sell it, so you're actually making some money and you're not necessarily contributing to waste. So I do think there's a market there.
Sounds like a commercial opportunity for somebody. I know there are systems that are
Yeah.
out there, but because there were 20 plus years ago. All right, so back to my question: how does the market look beyond the big three? What did you find out about that?
The big three are definitely the drivers of a lot of what is happening in the data center space. So they are kind of calling the shots in regards to where things are going in the market and the power consumption. But I will say, because of the growth, there's a lot of companies pivoting and building data center products, and we're even seeing some startups emerge to support the growth in the data center space. So while the big three are the drivers, I think they're creating almost a new market and a new industry for companies to add data center products, data center divisions, and startups like Chris's company. Mod 43 is a brand new startup that was driven from the growth by the big three. So I think it's kind of a combination of their spurring innovation and helping inspire startup ideas and new companies.
All right, so assuming we got Amazon, Microsoft, and Google as the big three, is there a second tier, or would you put Meta and whatever Elon's thing is and
Oh, XAI.
XAI, thank you. And I don't know, Oracle maybe, Salesforce maybe. Like I don't know, IBM maybe. Are those second tier, or like how does that market look at the super big level or the macro
Yeah.
level?
So there wasn't a lot of discussion at the event in particular about kind of the second tier of who are the firms, but I would say um, I think there is a reasonable market of companies that are not the big three, but are definitely making waves. And I think what we're going to do is see second tier AI companies that are focused on something more niche and specific, more like a best of breed, versus trying to compete with like an open AI that's more general and broad that can do anything. Almost like what we saw in procurement, where you had the end-to-end solution that could kind of do everything. To me, that's kind of like the
In
open AI.
theory,
In theory,
in fantasy, but yeah, sure.
yes. In marketing speak, so I would equate that to like the open AIs of the world. But then we had kind of the pendulum swing to a lot of these best in breed category specific procure tech companies. I think we're going to see more of those emerge in the AI space that are very vertical specific. For example, an AI platform that is specifically designed for manufacturers,
Right.
or an AI platform that is specifically designed for HR, where sure, ChatGPT and open AI, driven platforms can do some of that, but they're not going to be as niche and specific. So instead of spending your own time and resources building out workflows and the agents in a more broad platform, you'll be able to kind of quickly go to market in something that's more niche.
So maybe somebody might commission a study on what the state of the market looks like beyond the big three. I think that would be very fascinating because, like, the question, I didn't even ask this, or think about this, is OpenAI, do they run their own data center? And if not now, will they in the future? So there's feels like there's all this jockeying and positioning, especially at that second tier. And I wonder how all those second tier providers, are they just minuscule compared to the big three, or are they on par? So I think there's a lot yeah, go ahead.
I just typed into ChatGPT the state of the market beyond the big three players in AI, and it says beyond the big three, which are typically referred to as OpenAI, Google DeepMind, and Anthropic, is a highly dynamic, fragmented, and full of competition, innovation, and regionally diverse. So that's their kind of readout on that. It's a very, very fragmented space, but heavy push on the innovation side because there's so much competition. You've got to innovate and change almost daily.
And this also gets to another point that I'd be curious about, and this is just random, is what would Temu or oh my God, what's the Chinese Amazon equivalent? Why am I drawing a blank on that?
Alibaba?
Alibaba, thank you. Wow, I was not going to come up with that. What do their data centers look like, and what kind of consumption, and what are the issues they're tackling? Because obviously what we've been talking about is very North American centric. So again, not that we have to answer these questions now, but it's interesting because those issues come up.
Yeah.
All right, my last question, and we can close out this, is did national security come up as a topic? Because again, like I said, supply chains over the last 5 years have become much more of a national security priority. One of President Biden's first things was to he signed some executive orders on prioritizing our national supply chains. So do you see, or did anybody talk about not only data centers as a national security interest, at least, but also there's been a lot of attacks on US power grids and a lot of chatter about taking out or trying to disrupt the US power systems. I wonder, the data centers are downstream of that, but also you could imagine that that perhaps they would be targeted too.
So surprisingly, security was barely discussed in any of the sessions that I attended. It was really the focus on growth, power, the whole supply chain operation about supporting the growth. That was much more of the focus. But I did attend a session, and the CEO of a company, a security company, this is a really interesting pivot for his business. He has developed a whole division of a security company that provides security on site for data centers.
Yeah,
So companies who have a data center, to your point, security is a huge concern, and you don't want people just having easy access to break into the data center. Now, the whole cybersecurity is another piece of that, but I'm talking about physical bodies on site. And he said his biggest issue is staffing. He can't find enough people to actually serve in the security roles to keep up with the demand. So what he's doing is his company is investing in technology and implementing technology to be able to provide security to augment having people physically on the ground.
Well, and not to be alarmist, but I also think it is useful to look at what's happened recently in Ukraine and Russia, where with the recent operation that the Ukrainians, why am I drawing a blank on? I'm drawing a blank on that one. Sorry, it's been a long day. But the where they sent the drones
Drones.
in, yeah, in the containers, like you could see that type of attack on data centers. You could see it on electrical grids. So that, like well, you got to give feedback to the conference organizers. They got to get on the security thing because I think it's.
It would be an interest. So I haven't received, I'm hoping they do a post survey. I think that's a
I'm
big
only
miss
half joking though.
if event organizers, but it's an interesting, if they do ask for content feedback, it's an interesting discussion point to have at least a couple sessions that are more focused on the security. I almost get the sense that people are just trying to keep up, that the security is not the sole focus right now. I think once all these new data centers are built and ready for deployment, I think security is going to become something that's more important. But if you are in the security space or an innovator and a creator, it's definitely a market to consider now. Get your foot in the door and get something built so you have it ready to go as all these data centers begin to open.
Yeah, and I would just say, yeah, I would advocate for that. And I think in closing, I would just say that also there is an article, I haven't ever read it yet, about how I believe it's XAI, but it's whatever that they built a data center and it's poisoning the town that sits right up next to it. So I do think that these environmental issues we're going to have to watch as in addition to the national security. So tell the organizers we want more of that content.